What happens when one of Hollywood's most private actors finally breaks his silence, only to have a talk show host push way too far? Tonight, we're diving into the moment Macaulay Culkin walked off Jimmy Kimmel's show after a clash that left the entire studio in stunned silence. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is something far more intense, far more personal, and it all unraveled in real time. Before we get into exactly what was said that made Culkin stand up and leave, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrities walking off interviews. Is it justified? Or should they just sit there and take it? Now, let's get into what really happened. The interview started normally enough. Macaulay Culkin walked out to applause, shook Jimmy's hand, and settled into the guest chair. The audience was excited. Culkin doesn't do a lot of talk shows anymore, so this was supposed to be a rare treat. Jimmy opened with some light banter about Culkin's recent projects, his life in Paris, and how he's been staying out of the Hollywood spotlight for years. Jimmy leaned back in his chair with that signature grin. So, Macaulay, you've been pretty quiet lately. What have you been up to? Still avoiding the paparazzi? Culkin smiled, but it was measured. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on some things. I have a podcast. I've done some acting here and there. Mostly just living life, you know? Trying to be a normal person as much as that's possible. Jimmy nodded, but there was something in his tone, something that hinted he wasn't going to keep things light for long. A normal person, right. But you weren't always just a normal person, were you? I mean, you were one of the biggest child stars on the planet. Home Alone, My Girl, Richie Rich. You were everywhere. Culkin's expression tightened slightly, just for a second. Yeah, I was. That was a long time ago. Jimmy pressed forward. But it's gotta be weird, right? Like, people still see you as that kid. Do you ever feel like you're stuck in that moment? Like, do people expect you to still be that wide-eyed kid screaming into your hands? There was a brief pause. The audience laughed a little, but Culkin didn't. He shifted in his seat. I think people have their own relationship with those movies, and that's fine. But I've moved on. I'm not that kid anymore, and I haven't been for a very long time. Jimmy wasn't letting it go. Sure, but come on. You got to admit, it's a little funny. I mean, you're famous for being a kid who got left behind by his family. That's got to sting a little, right? Especially with everything that happened with your own family. The energy in the room shifted. You could feel it. Culkin's jaw tightened, and his smile faded. That's not really what I'm here to talk about, Jimmy. Jimmy leaned in, still grinning. But there was an edge now. No, I get it. But your story is fascinating, man. Your parents, the legal battles, the whole emancipation thing. That was huge. People were talking about it for years. Do you think that shaped who you are today? Culkin took a breath, clearly trying to keep his composure. Look, everyone's childhood shapes who they become. Mine was complicated. I've dealt with it. I don't really need to rehash it on television. But Jimmy wasn't backing down. I mean, your dad was pretty intense, right? From what I've read, he was really pushing you hard. Do you think he was trying to live through you? Or was it just about the money? The audience went quiet. This wasn't playful anymore. Culkin stared at Jimmy for a long moment before responding. I don't think that's fair to ask. That's my family. That's my life. And honestly, it's none of your business. Jimmy put his hands up in mock surrender. Hey, I'm just asking what people want to know. I mean, you're here, right? You agreed to come on the show. People are curious about your life. Culkin's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. I agreed to come on and talk about my work, not to be interrogated about my childhood trauma for entertainment. Jimmy laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, man. It's not an interrogation. It's a conversation. People love you. They want to know how you're doing. Culkin leaned forward slightly. Then ask me how I'm doing. Don't dig into stuff that you know is painful just to get a reaction. Jimmy's smile wavered, but he kept going. All right. So how are you doing? Really? Because, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but you've had some rough years, right? There were rumors, legal stuff, some personal struggles. Are you in a good place now? Culkin exhaled slowly. I'm fine. I'm happy. I have a family. I have projects I care about. I'm doing well. Jimmy nodded, but he couldn't help himself. That's great. That's really great. But you gotta understand, people were worried about you for a while. There were pictures, stories. You didn't look so good for a bit there. What happened? Culkin's eyes narrowed. What happened is, I lived my life. I went through things. I came out the other side. That's it. Jimmy shrugged. Sure, but like, what things? I mean, were you struggling with anything? Depression? Substances? Anything like that? Culkin's voice dropped, colder now. Are you seriously asking me this right now? Jimmy seemed to realize he was on thin ice, but he tried to laugh it off. I mean, it's just a question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Culkin stared at him. Then why ask it? There was an uncomfortable silence. Jimmy fumbled for a moment, then tried to pivot. All right. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about your friendship with Michael Jackson. That was a whole thing, right? You two were close. What was that like? Culkin's expression went blank. Are you kidding me right now? Jimmy raised his hands again. What? People are curious. You were friends with one of the most famous people in the world, and there were always questions about that friendship. I'm just asking what it was like. Culkin's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Michael was my friend. He was kind to me when a lot of people weren't, and I'm not going to sit here and let you turn that into something ugly. Jimmy tried to recover. I'm not trying to make it ugly. I'm just saying there were allegations, there were questions. You testified for him, right? You defended him. Do you still stand by that? Culkin stood up. The studio went silent. Jimmy looked genuinely surprised. Culkin reached up and pulled off his microphone, his movements deliberate and calm. The audience didn't know whether to react. Some people looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. Jimmy finally spoke, his voice uncertain. Whoa, Macaulay! Come on, man! Sit down! We're just talking! Culkin looked at him, and his voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the anger beneath it. No, Jimmy, we're not just talking. You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to bait me into giving you sound bites about the worst parts of my life. That's not a conversation. That's exploitation. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but it sounded hollow. I mean, come on. This is what talk shows do. We talk about stuff. If you didn't want to talk about it, you shouldn't have come on. Culkin set the microphone on the armrest of the chair. I came on to promote my work and have a normal conversation, not to be ambushed. There's a difference between asking questions and being disrespectful, and you crossed that line about 5 minutes ago. Jimmy looked at the audience, as if expecting them to side with him, but the room was still. All right, man. If you feel that way, then I guess there's nothing I can say. Culkin nodded slowly. No, there isn't. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit. Jimmy's voice called out from behind him, louder now, trying to regain control of the situation. Macaulay, come on, don't be like that. We're just having a conversation here. Culkin stopped a few feet from the stage exit. He didn't turn around right away. The audience was completely silent now, every eye locked on him. When he finally did turn back, his expression was calm, but his words had weight. A conversation requires two people who respect each other. You clearly don't respect me, so I don't see the point in continuing this. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, his hands spread in a gesture that was meant to look conciliatory, but came off as defensive. Look, I'm sorry if I offended you. That wasn't my intention. I was just asking questions that I thought people wanted answered. Culkin took a few steps back towards center stage, not to sit down, but to make sure Jimmy heard him clearly. That's the problem, Jimmy. You keep saying people want to know. But what you really mean is you want the ratings. You want the clip that's going to go viral tomorrow. You don't actually care about me or my story. You just want to exploit it. Jimmy shook his head quickly. That's not fair. I do care. I've always been a fan of yours. I grew up watching your movies. I think everyone here did. We all love you. Culkin's laugh was short and bitter. If you loved me, you wouldn't have spent the last 15 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television. You wouldn't have brought up my father, my personal struggles, or my friend who's not here to defend himself. You would have asked me about my podcast, my music, the things I'm actually doing now, but instead, you went for the cheap shots. Jimmy's face flushed. He glanced at his producers off stage, then back at Culkin. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I was trying to have a real conversation. People don't want the sanitized version where we just talk about your projects and pretend like nothing else exists. They want to know who you really are. Culkin's voice rose slightly, still controlled but with more intensity. You don't get to decide who I really am. You don't know me. You know, a tabloid version of me, a version that was created when I was too young to defend myself. And you're trying to drag that version out again because it's easier than treating me like an actual human being. Jimmy pointed at the audience as if they were his backup. Look around this room. These people are here because they care about you. They want to understand what you went through. There's nothing wrong with that. Culkin scanned the audience. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. A few seemed to be enjoying the drama. He turned back to Jimmy. You're hiding behind the audience to justify your questions. But here's the thing, Jimmy. Just because people are curious doesn't mean they're entitled to every painful detail of my life. And just because I'm a public figure doesn't mean I owe you my trauma as entertainment. Jimmy stepped out from behind the desk, trying to bridge the physical gap between them. Okay, I hear you, but you have to understand, this is my job. I ask questions. Sometimes they're tough questions. If I only asked softball questions, the show would be boring. People would tune out. Culkin shook his head slowly. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being cruel. You could have asked me about how I rebuilt my life. You could have asked me what I learned from my experiences. You could have approached it with some empathy. Instead, you went straight for the jugular because you thought it would make good TV. Jimmy's tone shifted, becoming slightly more aggressive. You know what, Macaulay? Maybe you're being a little too sensitive here. I mean, you're a public figure. You've been in the spotlight your whole life. You had to know that people were going to ask about this stuff. Culkin's eyes went cold. And there it is, the classic move. When you can't defend your actions, you blame the other person for being too sensitive. You know what that sounds like, Jimmy? It sounds like gaslighting. The audience gasped. A few people murmured. Jimmy's face went red. Whoa. That's a pretty serious accusation. I'm not gaslighting you. I'm trying to have a dialogue here, and you're the one who's shutting it down. Culkin took another step forward. I'm shutting it down because it stopped being a dialogue the moment you started treating my pain like a punchline. You wanted to make me uncomfortable. You wanted to see if you could rattle me. Well, congratulations. You did. But I'm not going to sit here and play along. Jimmy threw his hands up. Fine. You want to leave? Leave. But don't act like I'm the bad guy here. You agreed to come on this show. You knew what kind of show this is. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't do interviews. Culkin's voice was steady, almost eerily calm. You're right about one thing. I shouldn't have come here. I thought maybe things had changed. I thought maybe you'd treat me with some basic decency, but I was wrong. You're the same as everyone else who's tried to profit off my story without caring about the person behind it. Jimmy's jaw tightened. That's not fair. I've interviewed hundreds of people. I've had tough conversations before. Nobody else has walked off. Culkin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Maybe nobody else had the guts to call you out. Or maybe you just picked the wrong person to mess with tonight. Jimmy looked genuinely frustrated now. So what do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. Can we move past this and finish the interview? Culkin stared at him for a long moment. Your apology doesn't mean anything if you don't understand why what you did was wrong. You're not sorry for what you said. You're sorry that I'm not playing along. You're sorry that this is blowing up in your face. That's not an apology. That's damage control. Jimmy's voice grew louder. Okay, you know what? I tried. I tried to apologize. I tried to keep this civil. But if you want to turn this into some big moral stand, go ahead, walk off. Make me the villain. But don't pretend like you're some victim here. You've made plenty of money off your fame. You've benefited from people's curiosity about your life. You don't get to cherry pick when you want to engage with that and when you don't. Culkin's expression didn't change. You're absolutely right. I have benefited from my fame. I've also paid a price for it that you could never understand. And the difference between me and you is that I've never used someone else's pain to boost my career. I've never sat across from someone and intentionally tried to hurt them for ratings. Jimmy shook his head, exasperated. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Culkin cut him off. Yes, you were. Maybe you didn't realize it. Maybe you convinced yourself that you were just doing your job. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you knew exactly what you were doing. You saw an opportunity to create a moment, and you took it. And now you're mad because it backfired. Jimmy looked at the camera, then back at Culkin. You know what? Fine. You want to make this about me being the bad guy? Go ahead. But people are going to see this, and they're going to make their own judgments about who's being reasonable here and who's being dramatic. Culkin nodded slowly. Yeah, they will, and I'm okay with that, because I know what happened here tonight. I know that I came here in good faith, and you violated that trust. Whatever people think, at least I can walk out of here with my integrity intact. Jimmy's voice was sharp now. Your integrity? You're walking off a talk show because you didn't like the questions. How is that integrity? Culkin's response was measured, but firm, because staying would mean accepting that it's okay to be treated this way. It would mean validating your behavior, and I'm done doing that. I spent years of my life letting people push me around, letting them use me, letting them turn my story into something for their benefit. I'm not doing it anymore. Jimmy looked around, almost pleading with the audience now. Is anyone else seeing this? Am I crazy here? I asked some questions. He didn't like them. That's it. That's the whole story. Culkin shook his head. No, Jimmy. That's not the whole story. The whole story is that you invited me here under the pretense of a friendly interview, and then you ambushed me. The whole story is that you thought you could bully me into giving you what you wanted, and when I stood up for myself, you tried to make me look like the problem. That's the whole story. The tension in the room was suffocating. Jimmy stood there, clearly unsure of what to say next. Culkin waited, giving him one more chance to say something real. Jimmy finally broke the silence, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. Look, Macaulay, I don't know what else you want me to say. I'm trying here. Culkin's response was immediate. You're not trying, you're scrambling. There's a difference. If you were actually trying, you would have stopped the moment you saw I was uncomfortable. But you didn't. You kept pushing because you thought you could get something out of me. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. So what? I'm just supposed to read your mind? How am I supposed to know where the line is if you don't tell me? Culkin let out a laugh that had no humor in it. The line is basic human decency, Jimmy. It's not that complicated. When someone tells you they don't want to talk about something, you don't keep pushing. When someone says you're crossing into personal territory, you back off. You don't need to read my mind. You just need to listen. Jimmy's face hardened. You know what I think? I think you came on this show looking for a fight. I think you wanted to walk off so you could make some big statement about being mistreated. This whole thing feels like a setup. The accusation hung in the air. Culkin stared at Jimmy with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and anger. Are you serious right now? You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy having my personal life dissected on television? You think I woke up today and thought, you know what would be fun? Going on Jimmy Kimmel and having him throw my trauma in my face? Jimmy shrugged. I don't know. You tell me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to make me the villain in some narrative you've already written in your head. Culkin's voice rose for the first time, real anger breaking through the calm facade. You made yourself the villain, Jimmy. I didn't have to do anything. You did this all on your own. I came here to talk about my work, and you turned it into an interrogation. Don't you dare try to flip this around like I'm the one causing problems. Jimmy stepped closer, his own anger finally showing. You want to talk about causing problems? You're the one who stood up and made a scene. You're the one who's making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. If you had just answered a few questions and moved on, we wouldn't be here right now. Culkin shook his head slowly. That's exactly the problem. You think I should just sit there and take it. You think because I'm a guest on your show, I owe you compliance. But I don't. I don't owe you anything, except the respect I'd give any human being, and you couldn't even give me that in return. Jimmy's voice was sharp. I gave you respect. I brought you on my show. I gave you a platform. That's respect. Culkin's laugh was bitter. A platform? You gave me a platform to be humiliated. That's not respect. That's exploitation dressed up as opportunity. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly why I'm leaving. Jimmy threw his hands up. Fine, leave, but don't expect me to sit here and be lectured by you about respect. You're not perfect, Macaulay. You've had your own issues. You've made your own mistakes. So don't stand there acting like you're above all this. Culkin's voice went very quiet, but somehow it filled the entire room. I never said I was perfect. I never said I haven't made mistakes. But the difference between my mistakes and yours is that my mistakes hurt me. Your mistakes hurt other people. And you do it with a smile on your face, in front of a live audience, and you call it entertainment. The audience was completely silent. Some people were recording on their phones. Others just sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Jimmy looked around, seeming to realize for the first time how badly this had gone. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. Okay, you're right. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have backed off sooner. I'm sorry, genuinely. Can we please just sit down and finish this like adults? Culkin studied him for a moment. You keep apologizing, but you don't mean it. You're apologizing because this is going sideways and you want to salvage it. You're not apologizing because you understand what you did wrong. Jimmy's jaw clenched. What do you want from me? You want me to grovel? You want me to admit I'm a terrible person? What will it take for you to stop acting like I committed some unforgivable crime? Culkin's voice was steady. I want you to understand that the questions you ask have consequences. I want you to understand that behind every celebrity you interview is a real person with real feelings. I want you to stop treating people's pain like it's content to be mined for your benefit. That's what I want. Jimmy stared at him. And if I say I understand that, will you stay? Culkin shook his head. No, because saying it and meaning it are two different things, and I don't think you're capable of meaning it. Not tonight, anyway. Jimmy's frustration boiled over. You know what, Macaulay? You're being incredibly self-righteous right now. You act like you're the only person who's ever been hurt. Everyone who sits in that chair has a story. Everyone has pain. And most of them manage to get through the interview without making it into some grand statement. Culkin's expression didn't change. Maybe they should have walked off too. Maybe if more people stood up for themselves, you'd learn to be a better interviewer. Jimmy's voice dropped. You think I'm comfortable right now? You're ruining my show. You're making me look bad in front of my audience. You're creating a disaster that I'm going to have to deal with long after you leave this building. Culkin's response was immediate. Good. Maybe you should feel uncomfortable. Maybe you should have to deal with consequences for once. Because up until now, you've gotten away with this. You've asked invasive questions. You've made your guests squirm, and nobody's called you out on it. Well, I'm calling you out. Jimmy shook his head. Don't lecture me. You don't know anything about what I've been through or what I've learned. You're standing there judging me like you have all the answers, but you don't. Culkin's voice was calm but firm. You're right. I don't have all the answers, But I know enough to recognize when someone's trying to exploit me. And I know enough to walk away when that happens. Jimmy looked at the camera, then back at Culkin. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? No resolution? No closure? Just drama? Culkin smiled slightly, but there was sadness in it. Sometimes there is no resolution, Jimmy. Sometimes you just have to accept that you messed up and move on. Jimmy stood there, silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. I hope you feel good about this. Culkin's response was simple. I don't feel good about it. I feel sad. Sad that it came to this. Sad that you couldn't just treat me with basic respect, but I don't regret it. Because staying would have been worse. Jimmy nodded slowly, and for the first time, he looked genuinely deflated. All right, if that's how you feel, then go. Culkin looked at him for one last moment. I hope you think about this, Jimmy. Not for my sake, but for everyone else who's going to sit in that chair after me. And with that, Macaulay Culkin turned and walked off the stage. The audience sat in stunned silence as he disappeared through the exit. Jimmy stood there for a moment, then turned to the camera with a forced smile. Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after this break. But everyone knew things would not be going back to normal. What started as a routine interview had turned into something much bigger. A moment where someone finally said enough. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more breakdowns like this. And comment below with your answer to this question. Do you think celebrities should walk off interviews when hosts cross the line? Or should they just push through no matter what?